Hello there, I am Noor al-Basar. Welcome to this lecture on Mikhail Bakhtin. Before I begin my lecture on Mikhail Bakhtin, subscribe to my YouTube channel. How will I know that I am contributing something? When you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I will have this realization that I am doing great. So please subscribe. We discussed formalism in detail. We discussed the background to formalism. We discussed the philosophical background to formalism. We discussed the aesthetics of Immanuel Kant. So I hope now we are able to make sense of this theory and movement of formalism. But there is a need of a rigorous critique of formalism. We know that formalism was a literary theory that emphasized the formal aspect of art and literature. So the style of the work of art was important for the formalists. They studied the linguistic style of a work of art, and on the basis of their linguistic analysis, they judged the worth of a work of art. This was their criticism. So their criticism and their view of art was abstract. They dealt with an abstract linguistic structure in the work of art. Mikhail Bakhtin criticizes this aspect of formalism because he thinks that formalism is excessively concerned with abstractions. He says that the view held by the formalists about the work of art was as abstract as the view held by those who were in favor of a historical, psychological, or a philosophical approach towards literature. Both of these approaches, he says, are abstract. They are equally abstract. That is why he presents a critique not only of formalism but of language also. By coming up with a critique of language, he actually comes up with a critique of Western philosophy. So Bakhtin's conception of language, his conception of the genre of novel, his conception of stylistics is overlain with this critique of Western philosophy, this critique of the centralizing powers that have always existed in the philosophies and works of various authors, critics, and philosophers. The essay that we will analyze in this lecture is Discourse in Novel by Mikhail Bakhtin. This essay is about the genre of novel, about the stylistic analysis of novel, but it is more than that. Because in this essay, he presents a critique of language. He comes up with certain concepts, and these concepts are Heteroglossia, polyphony, and carnival. Polyphony and carnival are discussed elsewhere, but we can find the trace of these two concepts in this essay also. So we will discuss these concepts, and then we will discuss his view of the stylistics of novel, his view of the genre of novel, and his view of literature. These concepts Bakhtin explains with reference to language. The formalists were of the view that language was the global science of literature. That is why they chose linguistics for their study, and we discussed this in detail, how the formalists chose linguistics for the analysis of the work of art, for the theorization of literary, for the theorization in the field of literary studies. Bakhtin says that the formalists were mistaken because for them language was an abstract system. And this was the finding of the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. For Saussure, language was not, Saussure discovered that language was not a naming system, that language was an independent and autonomous system. And he differentiated between langue and parole. Langue for Saussure was the complete language system, the whole in which individual speakers participated. And parole was part of that language which was actualized in the speech of an individual. So the individual appropriates part of a language, part of a language system, and that becomes his speech, that becomes what he calls parole. Bakhtin says that this was the influence of linguistics on the thinking of the formalists. These concepts led the formalist thinkers to theorize in abstract terms about art and literature. Bakhtin begins his essay by saying that his task is to reconcile the two aspects of literature, the social aspect of literature and the linguistic aspect of literature. So it is here that the role of Bakhtin becomes of much importance. He reconciles these two extremes in the context of literary theory. So Bakhtin says that the linguists were mistaken by giving an independent and autonomous status to the abstract rules, the abstract system of language, or the abstract rules that govern the system of language. Because he thinks that the very nature of language is social. He does agree with the formalists that form and content are one. He does agree with them that content and form should not be treated as two different aspects of literature. But he says that form, that is meaning, that is content, is actually a social phenomenon. It is dependent on the social context in which it operates. The formalists committed this mistake by treating language as if it was a separate, it was an independent and autonomous system like the object of science. But for Bakhtin, language could not be detached from its social context because the very nature of language is social. Language is a social phenomenon. It cannot be neutral. For the formalists, language was neutral. The words could be neutral. In the technique of defamiliarization, we discussed how the artist tries to restore the originality of the object. So restoring the originality of the object meant that the artist used neutral words for the description of the world and the objects in the world. Bakhtin says that words are not neutral. Words are already overlain with qualifications, with meanings. And in this context, he explains these terms, heteroglossia. So we explain these two terms first. What is meant by heteroglossia? Bakhtin says that in any unitary language, in any so-called unitary language or national language, there are languages. In linguistic terms, there are dialects within a single language. But Bakhtin says that there are more divisions in a in a single language, in a unitary language. And those divisions are heteroglots. Those divisions exist within the single language. So the single language is not a unitary system of abstract rules. The single language is a combination of various unities, of various other languages. And those languages were ignored by the formalists because they treated language as if language was a unitary system, an abstract system. For Bakhtin, different age groups, various classes in society, and various divisions in society have got their own language. The language of the marketplace is different from the language of the school. The language of the school is different from the language of the university. The language in a law court is different from the language spoken in a family. Even family has got its own language. Even the times of the day have got different languages. A family may speak one language in the morning, it may speak another language in the evening. For example, when the family is sitting in a park, it may speak one language, but when the family is sitting in a mosque or in a church, it may speak another language. But when the family is sitting at the dinner table, it may speak a different language. So language varies from time to time, from place to place, from group to group, from class to class. And these languages, these various forms of language actually exist within the so-called national language or unitary language. This is his concept of heteroglossia. This is his concept of languages. This is his concept of languages within a single language. This is easier to understand. When one looks around, one sees that the Bakhtinian concept of heteroglossia is true, because we encounter various groups in our interaction with people, and we encounter different styles. Different people have got different styles. And in linguistic, they use the term idiolect for the individual variation in language. Every person has got his own style of speaking, of appropriating language for his purpose. For Bakhtin, words in language are not neutral. Words are already overlain with qualifications and with meanings. When we choose a word, we do not choose a neutral word. We choose a word which has already been chosen by other people. We choose a word, and with choosing this word, we choose various meanings that are already there with the word. So every word, Bakhtin says, is a rejoinder or a reply to other words. It is not neutral. So where is the individual? When the individual chooses a word, the word is not his because it is already covered with meanings and with conceptions. How does the word become the word of the individual who chooses it? We have to understand this. This is important. Bakhtin says that we exist at the border of various meanings of a single word when we choose it. When we choose a word, we are at the border of various meanings that are associated with that word. It will be easier to explain if I give you an example. Take the example of democracy. In European context or in American context, the word democracy is associated with positive connotations. There, when one utters this word democracy, when a European utters this word democracy, other words of positive connotations come to his mind. For example, when he speaks of democracy, he may think of freedom. The word equality may come to his mind. When he speaks of democracy, the word justice may come to his mind. These are all positive words, and democracy there is associated with these positive other words. So the word there in that context is a rejoinder, a reply to other words which are of positive meaning, because the history of Europe is marked by this struggle. Through democratic effort, they came out of the age of darkness, they came out of barbarianism, they came out of the state of savagery, and acquired civilized values. There, the word democracy has different connotations because the word is a reply to various other words in that context which are positive. But when you transport this word from the context of Europe to, for example, the context of Iraq, there, a national of Iraq, when he hears this word democracy, speaks this word democracy, none of the positive terms associated with it in the European context comes to his mind. Because there, the word democracy is not a reply to freedom, to justice and equality. There, the word democracy is a rejoinder to imperialism. There, the word democracy is a rejoinder to the loss of faith. There, the word democracy is a rejoinder to identity crisis. There, the word democracy is a rejoinder to the oppression that the nationals of Iraq go through. So, democracy has one meaning in one context and it has another meaning in another context. Here, the word is not neutral. The word is overlain with qualifications, with meanings. It's covered with the conceptions of other people when you choose it. You do not choose a neutral word, and you are completely dependent on the associations that word has with other words, with other conceptions. Let me give you another example, and that will explain this nature of dialogue between or among words. In a country, for example, take the example of our own country, and take the example of this word loyalty. You know, one group in a country may think that loyalty to us, to the state, is necessary no matter what. That it is our moral responsibility, that it is our political responsibility to declare our ultimate loyalty to the state. But there may be another group who may come up with the view that the ultimate loyalty has to be shown not to the state but to God, to religion. The authority of God, the authority of religion comes first. We have to show our loyalty to God first, to religion first. So if loyalty to state is at the cost of loyalty to God, we have to choose loyalty towards God. And the other group will say that loyalty to state means loyalty to state, and there should not be any excuses. You see this, the same word loyalty is overlain with different meanings. One group has one conception of it, the religious group has one conception of it, and the secular group or the nationalist group has another conception of it. So, When we choose this word, for example, a third person who belongs neither to the religious group nor to the secular or nationalist group, what is the choice with him? Where does he stand? Bakhtin says that when you enter into language, when you are about to choose a word, you are at the border of the various meanings of the word. For example, here, in the context of loyalty to the state or loyalty to God, we are at the border of these two conceptions held by these two people. So the word is overlain. So the word is overlain with the conceptions given to it by two groups. Now, when we choose the word, when we try to pick this word, we make a choice. And there Bakhtin says that we appropriate the word or language for ourselves. We do not choose a neutral word. And this conception of Bakhtin is similar to the conception held by Hegel. Hegel, in his historical dialectics, in his philosophy of the master and slave dialectics, explained how two subjects come into being when the subjects are recognized by each other as autonomous subjects, independent subjects. So a sort of synthesis happens between the thesis and antithesis, between one subject and another subject. And this synthesis is necessary for the realization of complete subjecthood. Bakhtinian concept of, coming into being in terms of linguistics is marked by this view that we always have to choose a language for framing our consciousness. Without choosing language, without appropriating language, we cannot be conscious. We do not exist unless we have appropriated language for our existence. What does it mean? It means that language allows you to add your own conception to the conceptions that are already in it. Language allows you to add your own identity, your own conception to the conceptions that are already there. And this process of appropriating language is not a singular choice. It is not abrupt. It is not immediate. It is a becoming. You slowly and gradually appropriate language. This concept is Marxian also, because for Bakhtin, this appropriation of language for one's purpose is marked by an effort, by labor. Marx explained this, Hegel explained this. Hegel explained this in his master-slave dialectics, how the slave constructs the world in his own image through his labor, and when he has constructed the world in his own image, he sees himself in the world. So there his subjecthood is realized, there his autonomy is realized. But this subjecthood, this autonomy comes into being through labor, through effort. So for Bakhtin, coming into being in linguistic terms demands that you labor for the appropriation of language. You labor to use language to your purpose. And if you do not use language to your purpose, if you do not appropriate it for your purpose, it belongs to other people, it belongs to other groups, and you do not exist in the linguistic sense then.